In the spring of 1903, a small church in a sleepy Missouri town stood as a beacon of faith, its white steeple visible for miles across the rolling fields. To the outside world, it was a place of sanctuary and ritual, where families gathered on Sundays to sing hymns, share prayer, and mark life's milestones. Yet beneath its polished pews and solemn stained glass, the foundation concealed secrets that would quietly fester for decades. Parishioners began reporting subtle, inexplicable phenomena, soft whispers echoing beneath the altar, faint thuds against wooden panels, and the occasional metallic scrape that could not be accounted for. At first, church officials dismissed these occurrences as trickery or the natural creaks of an aging building. Yet over time, the incidents intensified in both frequency and strangeness. Skeptics suggested children, rats, or loose masonry, but the timing and patterns defied simple explanation. Some nights, worshippers claimed the sounds seemed deliberate, as if someone or something moved beneath the sacred floor unseen and unacknowledged. Letters among church authorities hinted at deliberate obfuscation, vague notes about maintenance, locked doors, and areas not to be disturbed. Around the same period, a string of disappearances and sudden illnesses began to intersect with these phenomena, creating a tangled web of rumor, fear, and speculation. Doctors could offer little clarity, while investigators found only fragmented evidence. The psychological tension became palpable. The town's faith was challenged by what could not be seen, heard, or fully understood. Some congregants whispered of ancestral curses, while others believed in a more earthly source of malevolence hidden beneath the altar. Moral and spiritual contrasts emerged: innocence versus malice, devotion versus deception, trust versus fear, creating a dissonance that unsettled even the most steadfast parishioners. As the story unfolded, investigators, historians, and folklorists would struggle to disentangle reality from interpretation. The church itself became a character, its sacred architecture hiding both literal and metaphorical depths, where fear and fascination intertwined. Every creaking floorboard, flickering candle, and shadowed corner became a clue, yet none provided definitive answers. The narrative's tension lies in these juxtapositions: faith and fear, sacred and profane, observation and imagination. By framing the church as a site where the ordinary and extraordinary converge, the audience is drawn into a story of human ambition, hidden transgression, and supernatural speculation, a story where truth and myth merge, leaving questions unresolved and the mystery alive across generations. This introduction establishes the foundation for a dark, immersive documentary narrative, priming viewers for a journey into psychological unease, moral ambiguity, and enduring legend. It invites reflection on the fragility of perception and the human desire to explain the inexplicable, setting the stage for the chapters to come. The Church of St. Bartholomew, constructed in 1895, dominated the small Missouri town both physically and socially. Its Gothic spire, meticulously carved stonework, and towering stained glass windows proclaimed sanctity, permanence, and moral authority. To parishioners, the church was not merely a building but the spiritual heart of their community, a place where faith and social structure intertwined. Reverend Malcolm Hargrove, the church's charismatic yet imposing leader, held unquestioned sway over the congregation. His sermons were precise, morally rigorous, and delivered with an air of intellectual gravitas. At first glance, he embodied piety, humility, and wisdom. Yet beneath the surface, documents, letters, and oral histories suggest Hargrove's life was entwined with secrecy, control, and a preoccupation with knowledge that few were permitted to witness. Parishioners often reported subtle dissonances, whispers behind doors, hurried meetings that excluded outsiders, and instructions that seemed opaque or unnecessarily complex. Diaries and letters reveal cryptic references to disturbances beneath the altar and matters requiring discretion, hinting at events or objects concealed from the public. Scholars examining these materials note the psychological interplay between spiritual guidance and manipulation, faith and intimidation, communal ritual, and personal obsession. The contrast between public sanctity and private secrecy becomes the defining feature of the church's narrative. Architecturally, the church reinforced this duality. The sanctuary, with its polished oak pews, carved altar, and radiant stained glass depictions of biblical scenes, conveyed transparency and devotion. Yet the edifice contained shadowed alcoves, hidden chambers, and a basement whose narrow stairway was concealed behind the pulpit. Parishioners occasionally noted cold drafts, unexplained noises, or the sensation of being observed in spaces that should have been empty. The interplay of light and shadow in these areas created a liminal space where perception and imagination overlapped. Folklorists suggest that the architecture itself amplified fear and fascination, transforming ordinary observation into a narrative of uncertainty. Reverend Hargrove's routines further heightened the tension. Though he maintained strict schedules and publicly exhibited moral rectitude, private diaries reveal unusual nocturnal habits. Hours spent in shadowed chambers, examining manuscripts, inspecting objects, or performing tasks whose purposes were not disclosed. Occasionally, young acolytes and church staff were summoned to assist with these secretive endeavors, fostering confusion, obedience, and anxiety. Observers describe how minor instructions were imbued with an authority that left participants hesitant to question motives. Psychological scholars argue that this interplay between hierarchy, obedience, and secrecy contributed to collective anxiety, shaping the community's perception of unexplained phenomena. The social structure of the town magnified these dynamics. Missouri's rural communities of the late 19th and early 20th centuries relied heavily on religious authority to regulate morality, social norms, and interpersonal conduct. Disruption or challenge to ecclesiastical hierarchy was socially and morally risky. Consequently, the clergy's concealments and private activities went largely unchallenged, allowing rumor, speculation, and selective observation to fill in narrative gaps. Parishioners' diaries record instances of moral tension, admiration for Hargrove's erudition combined with suspicion of his hidden practices. This duality fostered a collective uncertainty, where fear and fascination were interwoven with genuine reverence. Accounts of peculiar phenomena abound in surviving sources. Servants and parishioners noted occasional metallic scrapes, low murmurs, or vibrations emanating from beneath the altar. Shadows cast by flickering candlelight were described as disproportionately large or strangely mobile. Some children claimed to hear whispered conversations in empty rooms, while others reported objects moving without apparent cause. Clergy records reference matters requiring discretion and rituals not to be discussed, further reinforcing the ambiguity. Anthropologists note that such repeated unexplained occurrences within a socially authoritative environment often catalyze both legend formation and psychosomatic response among observers. The church's physical environment shaped not only perception, but behavior. The sanctuary's grandeur and ceremonial precision created an outward image of order, while hidden chambers and restricted access fostered intrigue and anxiety. Observers' experiences were further colored by anticipation, fear of transgression, and awareness of hierarchical oversight. Parishioners' diaries describe the sensation of entering the basement as stepping into a different world, claustrophobic, dimly lit, and imbued with a sense of historical gravity. Items stored there, including manuscripts, ritual implements, and mysterious artifacts, became focal points for speculation and storytelling. Folklorists argue that this combination of material culture, architectural concealment, and social hierarchy enabled the church to function simultaneously as a site of worship and a locus of mystery. The clergy's interpersonal relationships were marked by similar contrasts. Reverend Hargrove maintained a public persona of paternal guidance and moral instruction, yet private correspondence reveals subtle coercion, manipulative oversight, and perhaps even surveillance of parishioners' behaviors. Assistants and choir members were occasionally instructed to perform tasks without context, reinforcing obedience while generating unease. Diaries from parishioners record subtle behavioral cues, glances exchanged during sermons, unusual arrangements of seating, and unexplained absences of clergy or assistants. Scholars suggest these patterns demonstrate the intersection of authority, social observation, and psychological influence. In the broader context of town life, the church represented both stability and enigma. Social norms emphasized respect for clerical authority, yet the congregation was acutely aware of contradictions between public ritual and private actions. Parishioners noted incongruities, meticulous preparation of sacraments paired with secretive basement activities, solemn sermons contrasted by whispered disputes behind closed doors. These contrasts created a cultural lens through which unexplained phenomena, whether auditory, visual, or tactile, were interpreted as supernatural or morally significant. Anthropologists highlight how collective interpretation of ambiguous stimuli is amplified by social hierarchy and ritual context, explaining the persistence of stories surrounding the church. Scholars examining St. Bartholomew's Church emphasize the interplay of space, hierarchy, and human psychology. Diaries, letters, oral accounts, and architectural analysis converged to depict a site where faith, secrecy, and social authority collided. Parishioners' perceptions were conditioned by ritual, reverence, and hierarchical pressure, while the physical design of the building fostered both concealment and observation. The church emerges as a character in its own right, a living edifice that shaped human experience, memory, and interpretation. Its dual nature, sanctuary and stage for secrecy, establishes the framework for subsequent events that would challenge the boundary between rational explanation and superstition. By establishing these foundations, Section 1 situates the audience within a psychologically charged environment. The Church of St. Bartholomew is portrayed not only as a site of spiritual practice, but also as a locus where secrecy, authority, and unexplained phenomena intersect. This duality sets the stage for later developments, inviting the audience to consider how architecture, hierarchy, and human behavior can intertwine to create a narrative that blurs the line between reality and legend, faith and fear, order and chaos. This detailed portrait of the church and clergy creates a framework for understanding the unfolding mysteries beneath the altar, where the interplay of human ambition, psychological tension, and cultural expectations will collide with inexplicable events, leaving enduring questions unresolved and drawing viewers into a dark, immersive exploration of faith, secrecy, and the unknown. Beneath the hallowed floorboards of St. Bartholomew's Church lay a labyrinth of secrets that remained concealed for decades. The altar, meticulously crafted from oak and adorned with gilded carvings, projected sanctity, devotion, and moral authority. Yet beneath its polished surface, hidden compartments and sealed vaults held items and evidence that would confound investigators and parishioners alike. Early accounts suggest that the church was not merely a place of worship, but a repository for objects, manuscripts, and in some cases, human remains that spoke to a darker, concealed narrative. The discovery of these spaces challenged assumptions about morality, sanctity, and trust, forcing the community and later historians to reconcile faith with the shadowed underside of human action. Eyewitness accounts describe the first signs of concealed spaces. Parishioners and clergy reported unusual drafts near the altar, faint odors that could not be traced, and strange reflections on the polished stone floor that suggested recesses where none should exist. Children, less constrained by social norms, claimed to see shadowed movements or figures darting into spaces behind the altar. Initially dismissed as imagination or youthful fancy, these observations became increasingly unsettling as older members of the clergy recalled similar anomalies: muffled noises, scraping sounds, or faint whispers that seemed to emanate from the floor itself. Some interpreted these as supernatural manifestations. Others suggested structural oddities or the unintended acoustics of the stone and timber construction. By the mid-20th century, systematic investigations revealed tangible evidence of these hidden chambers. Forensic teams and journalists, gaining access during renovations, uncovered sealed vaults beneath the altar containing an assortment of artifacts, handwritten documents, ceremonial implements, religious icons altered with unusual markings, and in a few instances, skeletal remains. The documents, partially charred or water-damaged, hinted at administrative obfuscation. Letters between clergy discussing matters requiring discretion, or to be concealed for the good of the parish, suggested deliberate secrecy. The skeletal remains, partially wrapped in cloth or placed in small hidden niches, raised profound ethical and theological questions. Scholars debated whether they were victims of ritual, punishment, or an effort to conceal crime. The physicality of the spaces intensified their psychological impact. Narrow staircases, low ceilings, and walls lined with ancient stone created a claustrophobic environment, amplifying the sensations of fear and disorientation reported by those who entered. Shadows cast by torches or modern lighting appeared distorted, moving in ways that human perception struggled to reconcile. Investigators frequently described the unsettling experience of walking down the crypt corridors. The echo of their footsteps seemed to merge with distant, untraceable sounds. The smell of mold and decay mingled with the faint metallic scent of old artifacts, and the interplay of light and shadow conjured the sense of unseen presences. Anthropologists and psychologists suggest that such environments intensify both fear and narrative construction, creating fertile ground for the development of legend. Letters and records from church officials revealed a pattern of deliberate obfuscation. Some correspondences described missing records or inventories that were unaccounted for, while others suggested measures taken to preserve the dignity of the church, by keeping certain chambers sealed. Scholars analyzing handwriting and ink inconsistencies argue that multiple parties may have participated in the concealment, creating a layered narrative of secrecy that transcended a single individual's control. This coordination of secrecy highlights the intersection of authority, morality, and social expectation. The Church, as an institution, appears to have prioritized reputation and perceived sanctity over transparency, thereby magnifying the mystery surrounding the hidden chambers. The discoveries beneath the altar also sparked ethical debates within the community. Parishioners confronted questions that challenged their faith. Could a sacred space simultaneously harbor corruption? Were the hidden chambers evidence of human malevolence, misguided ritual, or both? Oral histories document conversations among townspeople in which fear, speculation, and moral judgment were intertwined. Older residents recounted childhood memories of stories whispered about the hidden places under the altar, sometimes tied to warnings against disobedience, curiosity, or sin. These stories became woven into the community's collective memory, blending observation, rumor, and moral instruction. Forensic analysis of the skeletal remains and artifacts revealed additional ambiguities. The remains, fragmented and aged, provided inconclusive evidence of cause of death, age, or identification. Ceremonial implements, some resembling common liturgical tools, others marked with unfamiliar symbols, suggested potential ritual use, though the exact purpose remained speculative. Anthropologists and historians note that ambiguity in physical evidence often reinforces narrative construction, as observers attempt to reconcile anomalies with known social, religious, or moral frameworks. In this case, the artifacts and remains became focal points for conjecture, highlighting the tension between empirical investigation and interpretive storytelling. Journalistic accounts from the late 20th century further complicated the narrative. Investigative reporters, often reliant on a mixture of parish records, personal diaries, and interviews, emphasized the contrasts inherent in the Church's hidden spaces. A place devoted to spiritual guidance also concealed elements associated with fear, secrecy, and human frailty. Articles described the physical layout of the crypts, the discovery of artifacts, and the reactions of clergy and townspeople, blending fact and speculation. This blending reinforced the legend's durability, ensuring that subsequent generations encountered a narrative both empirically grounded and morally charged. Contrast framing is central to the story of the buried secrets. The sacred space of the altar, long considered a symbol of moral authority and spiritual guidance, became inseparable from hidden corruption, concealed human action, and moral ambiguity. Faith was juxtaposed with fear and order with chaos. The discovery of chambers, artifacts, and skeletal remains challenged assumptions about the sanctity of religious institutions and the trustworthiness of human authority. Scholars highlight that such contrasts intensify psychological engagement, inviting observers to grapple with unresolved questions and moral complexity. Finally, the buried secrets underscored the interplay between curiosity, authority, and human psychology. Parishioners, clergy, and later investigators were drawn into exploration and speculation, each influenced by prior expectations, cultural context, and fear of transgression. The hidden chambers of St. Bartholomew's Church exemplify how secrecy, moral hierarchy, and environmental factors combine to create enduring mysteries that resist resolution. By examining both physical evidence and oral histories, this section reconstructs a space where human ambition, fear, and ethical tension intersected, establishing a foundation for continued fascination, debate, and legend. Through the lens of the buried secrets, the audience confronts fundamental questions. What is the relationship between authority and deception? Can sanctity coexist with concealment? And how do human psychology, culture, and architecture interact to produce enduring fear and speculation? These questions, unresolved and provocative, prepare viewers for the unfolding narrative, where history, folklore, and human observation collide beneath the altar of St. Bartholomew's Church. In the decades following the 1903 uncovering of hidden chambers beneath St. Bartholomew's Church, the intersection of investigation and folklore became increasingly complex. Early 20th century authorities and scholars faced the daunting task of reconciling tangible evidence with an ever-expanding network of witness accounts, oral histories, and supernatural claims. The physical anomalies, disturbed soil beneath the altar, skeletal remains inconsistent with church records, cryptic inscriptions on walls and vaults, presented a puzzle that defied simple categorization. Investigators meticulously documented these findings, yet the data alone could not account for the psychological and cultural dimensions of the church's mysteries. Each new observation prompted a cascade of interpretations, ranging from criminal intent to ritualistic behavior, from accidental concealment to divine intervention. Witnesses contributed an array of testimonies that amplified both the ambiguity and the drama surrounding the church. Parishioners recalled whispers emanating from walls, fleeting shadows glimpsed in candlelight, and the sensation of being observed while traversing the nave. Some described hearing metallic thuds, as though unseen hands moved objects in hidden chambers. Children, less restrained by social expectation, claimed to witness figures vanishing into the floorboards or descending into subterranean passageways. While some dismissed these accounts as fanciful or influenced by fear, psychologists and folklorists argue that even unverified testimonies carry cultural significance, reflecting community anxieties, moral frameworks, and social hierarchies. These accounts, when juxtaposed with documented evidence, illustrate the tension between observable fact and human interpretation. Forensic investigations provided a more structured empirical approach, yet yielded results that were equally confounding. Soil samples from beneath the altar showed evidence of repeated disturbance, suggesting intentional concealment or repeated activity over decades. Skeletal remains, analyzed using contemporary techniques, displayed anomalies in age, pathology, and positioning that did not align with church records of burials. Artifacts recovered from the crypt, ceremonial implements, manuscripts, and engraved tools, exhibited markings and arrangements that suggested ritualistic or symbolic significance. Experts debated whether these were the result of clandestine religious rites, acts of concealment to hide crime, or cultural practices whose meaning had been lost over time. The investigators' reliance on empirical data highlighted the limitations of science when confronted with human behavior embedded in secrecy, tradition, and fear. Simultaneously, folklorists and historians examined the narratives circulating among townspeople. Stories of ancestral curses, moral retribution, and divine punishment became interwoven with the physical discoveries beneath the altar. Folklore analysis revealed recurring motifs: warnings to children against curiosity, tales of clerical authority punishing disobedience, and moral instruction embedded in the retelling of events. These narratives often attributed agency to supernatural forces, framing unexplained phenomena as manifestations of divine will or ancestral judgment. Importantly, folklore not only transmitted cultural memory but also shaped perception, influencing how parishioners, visitors, and later investigators interpreted the church's physical anomalies. In essence, the legend and the evidence evolved in tandem, each informing the other in a dynamic cycle of meaning-making. Psychological analysis provides insight into how memory and perception may have contributed to the persistence of the church's mysteries. Collective trauma, amplified by fear of clerical authority and the rigid social hierarchy of early 20th century Missouri, likely influenced both the reporting and recollection of events. Researchers argue that the stress of navigating moral expectations, combined with encounters with unexplained phenomena, created conditions ripe for psychosomatic and suggestive experiences. The result was a blending of objective observation with interpretation colored by cultural norms, moral anxiety, and fear. In this context, witness testimony becomes as much a reflection of communal psychology as it is of physical reality, highlighting the interplay between perception, memory, and social pressure. The church itself functioned as both a stage and a participant in this interplay between investigation and folklore. Architectural features, the thick stone walls, shadowed alcoves, hidden stairways, and labyrinthine crypts, amplified uncertainty. Investigators noted that the echoing chambers distorted sound, while flickering torchlight and reflective surfaces created illusions of movement. Folklorists emphasized that the building's design likely contributed to the development of supernatural narratives, with environmental cues reinforcing stories of curses, apparitions, and hidden malice. The interplay of physical space and human psychology created conditions under which both empirical investigation and cultural storytelling were plausible, yet neither could fully explain the phenomena in isolation. Letters and administrative documents from the church provide another layer of complexity. Correspondences between clergy reveal intentional concealment of certain chambers, conflicting reports regarding inventory, and attempts to maintain parish reputation. Some documents mention items requiring discretion or records to remain sealed, while others hint at disputes among church leaders regarding management of subterranean spaces. Analysis of handwriting, ink, and phrasing suggests multiple authors, reflecting a coordinated effort to maintain secrecy across generations. These findings underscore the intersection of human intentionality and institutional authority, demonstrating how concealment, documentation, and moral decision-making can create enduring ambiguity. The juxtaposition of empirical investigation and folklore also illuminates the processes by which communities negotiate uncertainty. Scientific inquiry seeks measurable, replicable explanations, whereas folklore and oral history accommodate ambiguity, moral meaning, and symbolic resonance. At St. Bartholomew's Church, these approaches collided. Forensic reports documented anomalies, while stories of curses and retribution provided interpretive frameworks that made sense of otherwise inexplicable phenomena. The tension between these perspectives is central to understanding why the Church's mysteries persist. Neither rational analysis nor cultural storytelling alone is sufficient to resolve the questions raised by the hidden chambers. Instead, both contribute to an enduring narrative that blends fact, interpretation, and moral reflection. The role of moral and social authority further shaped the reception of findings. Clergy and community leaders wielded influence over what could be publicly acknowledged, often framing anomalies within a narrative of divine oversight or moral lesson. Parishioners' trust in spiritual authority, combined with fear of transgression, likely constrained dissenting accounts and reinforced collective memory. Folklorists note that such dynamics enhance the longevity of legend, as community members internalize, reproduce, and embellish stories in ways that align with social norms, religious expectations, and moral instruction. Additionally, media coverage amplified the interplay of investigation and folklore. Newspaper articles in the early to mid-20th century reported on the discovery of cryptic artifacts, skeletal remains, and hidden chambers with a mix of factual description and sensationalized interpretation. Journalists frequently quoted unnamed witnesses, referenced local legends, and highlighted inconsistencies in church records. These accounts contributed to the cultural construction of the church as a site of both historical significance and supernatural intrigue, further blurring the line between empirical observation and narrative embellishment. Importantly, the unresolved nature of the discoveries beneath the altar fueled ongoing debate. Scholars, psychologists, and folklorists continue to question the motives behind concealment, the meaning of ritualistic artifacts, and the accuracy of witness recollections. Was the church's hidden network of vaults a repository for illicit activity, a site of ritual practice, or an elaborate exercise in moral instruction? The lack of definitive evidence ensures that multiple interpretations remain plausible, sustaining fascination and speculation across generations. The contrast framing of this section underscores the central tension: empirical science versus superstition, fact versus myth, and law versus belief. Investigation and folklore operate in distinct epistemological frameworks, yet at St. Bartholomew's Church, they are inseparable. Scientific reports document anomalies that resist conventional explanation, while folklore provides moral, psychological, and symbolic context. Together, they illuminate not only the mysteries beneath the altar, but also the ways human communities navigate fear, authority, and ambiguity. Ultimately, the story of St. Bartholomew's Church demonstrates how investigation and folklore interact to create enduring narratives. The empirical record, combined with oral histories, psychological insight, and cultural interpretation, forms a multi-layered understanding of mystery that resists resolution. Each artifact, testimony, and legend contributes to a story in which human curiosity, moral authority, and unexplained phenomena converge. By examining this intersection, viewers are invited to grapple with unresolved questions. What is the nature of hidden knowledge? How do authority and secrecy shape perception? And can truth ever be separated from the narratives constructed to explain it? The church remains both a historical site and a symbol of enduring ambiguity. Its hidden chambers, skeletal remains, cryptic inscriptions, and layered folklore continue to challenge investigators, scholars, and parishioners alike. The narrative emphasizes that mystery persists not solely because of the unknown itself, but because of the interplay between human observation, cultural expectation, and the persistent need to find meaning in what cannot be fully understood. St. Bartholomew's Church, therefore, stands as a testament to the tension between investigation and folklore, science and superstition, fact and moral imagination, ensuring that its secrets endure for generations to come. The story of St. Bartholomew's Church did not end with the closing of the investigation or the documentation of the hidden chambers beneath the altar. Instead, it persisted through memory, both fragile and tenacious, transmitted by descendants, parishioners, and local residents who became unwitting custodians of a legacy steeped in fear, awe, and moral contemplation. Oral histories, memoirs, letters, and diaries preserved fragments of events that were never fully recorded in official accounts, allowing the Church's mysteries to inhabit both factual and imaginative spaces. These recollections offer a kaleidoscopic view of the past, blending perception, emotion, and interpretation, and revealing how memory functions as both record and distortion. Many surviving parishioners and their descendants recounted subtle yet chilling phenomena tied to the Church's hidden chambers. Recurring stories describe unexplained noises beneath the altar, muffled footsteps echoing through crypts, whispers that carried moral warnings or accusatory tones, and metallic scrapes suggesting movement within concealed compartments. Apparitions were also reported, sometimes fleeting, sometimes lingering. Shadowy figures at the edge of candlelight, faces peering from alcoves, or entire forms disappearing into the floorboards. These memories were often described with such vividness that descendants swore to feel the same sensations themselves, decades later, while visiting the now abandoned church. The persistence of these recollections suggests that memory operates not only as a conduit for facts, but also as a vehicle for emotion, communal anxiety, and inherited trauma. A central tension in examining these accounts lies in their relationship with archival evidence. Letters and parish records occasionally corroborate elements of the oral histories, yet contradictions abound. For instance, while multiple testimonies reference sudden, unexplained noises preceding the discovery of hidden chambers, official documentation remains sparse and inconclusive, offering no direct explanation. Likewise, memoirs often embellish or reinterpret events to emphasize moral lessons, spiritual consequences, or cautionary warnings. These divergences highlight a contrast between observation and imagination, skepticism and belief, and historical reality versus narrative interpretation. In essence, memory operates as a lens shaped by social, cultural, and psychological factors, producing a version of events that is simultaneously revealing and obfuscating. Psychological dynamics played a significant role in the formation and transmission of memory surrounding St. Bartholomew's Church. Collective trauma, reinforced by social hierarchy, religious authority, and fear of moral transgression, influenced how individuals perceived and recounted events. Parishioners who had experienced unusual phenomena, whether auditory, visual, or emotional, often internalized them as moral or spiritual messages, framing mysterious occurrences in terms of divine judgment or ancestral curses. Researchers note that such interpretive processes are common in communities facing ambiguity, stress, or moral scrutiny. Memory is shaped by both the event itself and the cognitive frameworks used to understand it. Over time, these frameworks solidified into cultural patterns, guiding subsequent generations in how to remember, recount, and react to the Church's mysteries. The transmission of these memories also relied on social cohesion and communal reinforcement. Local gatherings, storytelling sessions, and religious observances provided opportunities for shared recollection, during which accounts could be corroborated, contested, or embellished. This process of social transmission ensured that the narrative of the hidden chambers became embedded in local identity, morality, and imagination. Moral instruction was often intertwined with these retellings. Children were warned against curiosity, parishioners reminded of the consequences of sin, and descendants cautioned about the lingering presence of secrets left unchecked. Through repeated narration, the events beneath the altar were transformed into cautionary legend, their lessons magnified even as factual certainty diminished. Memory was further influenced by the material and architectural presence of the church itself. The edifice, with its thick stone walls, shadowed alcoves, and labyrinthine crypts, provided sensory cues that reinforced recollections. Visitors reported a weight in the air, chills along the corridors, and the unsettling echo of footsteps in empty spaces. These environmental factors acted as mnemonic triggers, heightening the vividness and plausibility of recalled experiences. Decay and disuse intensified these effects. Crumbling masonry, dust-laden pews, and overgrown grounds amplified the sense of abandonment and moral desolation, creating an atmosphere where memory, imagination, and fear converged. The physical church thus served as both a repository of history and a catalyst for psychological haunting. Letters, diaries, and memoirs preserved by descendants provide insight into how trauma and memory intersected. Some letters describe vivid dreams experienced by children and adults alike, dreams populated by the dark corridors beneath the altar, shadowed figures, and the sound of distant whispers. The recurrence of these dreams across generations suggests an intergenerational transmission of psychological imprint, wherein the collective memory of fear and moral anxiety was inherited alongside familial and communal identity. Diaries recounting first-hand experiences often blend sensory observation with moral reflection, indicating that memory was inseparable from interpretation. Events were remembered not merely as they occurred, but as they were understood, feared, and socially framed. The church's decline and the shifting demographics of the town reinforced the narrative's psychological potency. As younger generations moved away, the continuity of first-hand observation diminished, leaving oral histories and fragmented memoirs as primary sources of knowledge. Changing cultural attitudes and religious practices further altered the reception of these memories, emphasizing legend over fact and moral reflection over empirical investigation. The combination of material decay, shifting population, and preserved recollections created a liminal space in which the church's mysteries remained alive, compelling descendants and visitors to confront uncertainty, fear, and moral ambiguity. Contrasts between memory and evidence are central to understanding the cultural persistence of St. Bartholomew's story. Archival records provide a skeletal framework of events: dates of construction, notes on parish leadership, reports of discoveries beneath the altar. Memory, however, fleshes out this framework with texture, emotion, and narrative coherence. The interplay of documented fact and remembered experience produces a tension in which uncertainty becomes a defining characteristic. Viewers are drawn into this tension, compelled to ask, how much of what we recall is shaped by what occurred, and how much by the moral, cultural, and psychological structures that interpret it? The enduring fascination with the church also stems from the unresolved nature of these memories. Accounts describe auditory, visual, and emotional phenomena that cannot be fully explained, leaving space for speculation, reinterpretation, and debate. Psychologists argue that the combination of collective trauma, authority-driven, moral pressure, and environmental cues make such phenomena particularly resistant to rational closure. In this context, memory functions as both narrative and mechanism. It preserves knowledge, amplifies moral and emotional content, and sustains the enigma across generations. By examining memory as both record and distortion, it becomes clear that St. Bartholomew's Church operates as a living symbol of psychological and cultural ambiguity. Descendants, parishioners, and local residents carry forward a narrative that is never static, continually shaped by new interpretations, retellings, and encounters with the physical space itself. The hidden chambers beneath the altar, once sites of mystery and potential wrongdoing, now exist primarily within consciousness, in letters, dreams, stories, and moral reflection. This interweaving of experience, imagination, and interpretation ensures that the Church's legacy persists not as a closed chapter of history, but as an open, unresolved enigma. Ultimately, the study of survivors and memory illuminates the enduring power of narrative to shape community identity, moral understanding, and psychological experience. The interplay between observed events, inherited trauma, and interpretive storytelling demonstrates how memory operates both as an archive and as a mechanism for moral and cultural cohesion. St. Bartholomew's Church, through its hidden chambers, spectral echoes, and the recollections of those connected to it, continues to captivate, unsettle, and educate. The story persists because memory itself is malleable, contested, and alive, ensuring that each new retelling, each renewed encounter with the Church, contributes to the ongoing construction of an enigma that spans generations. In the end, the Church's mysteries remain unresolved not merely because of physical concealment or historical ambiguity, but because memory, the very human mechanism for preserving and interpreting the past, is inherently interpretive. It bridges gaps in evidence, sustains moral instruction, and perpetuates fear and fascination. Descendants and residents continue to navigate the space between fact and imagination, conscious that the hidden chambers beneath the altar, whether empty or full of untold secrets, define the boundaries of knowledge and belief. The haunting endures because memory itself refuses to yield certainty, leaving St. Bartholomew's Church as a locus of enduring cultural, psychological, and moral intrigue. The hidden chambers beneath St. Bartholomew's Church have provoked debate, fascination, and unease for over a century, compelling scholars, folklorists, psychologists, and legal historians to consider a multitude of interpretations. At the heart of these discussions is the question, why were these burials, artifacts, and documents concealed beneath the altar? The possibilities are manifold, ranging from deliberate ritualistic practice to human error, scandal cover-up, or symbolic gestures intended to communicate moral or spiritual truths. Each theory engages with contrasting frames of understanding: rational analysis versus superstition, moral order versus human deceit, and empirical evidence versus narrative interpretation. The convergence of these perspectives illustrates how a single series of events can persist as both historical reality and enduring legend. Religious scholars have long suggested that the burials may have been intentional, rooted in ritualistic or liturgical practices specific to the Church's early clerical culture. These theories draw on analysis of contemporaneous religious texts, esoteric practices noted in diocesan records, and accounts of minor clergy performing secret rites. Some posit that the chambers were used for acts of penance or symbolic offerings, possibly linked to the town's history of moral anxiety and fear of sin. Such practices could have involved the interment of objects, texts, or even human remains as a form of spiritual communication, intended to protect the congregation or satisfy perceived divine injunctions. Supporters of this theory argue that inconsistencies in parish documentation, discrepancies in burial registers, notes of missing artifacts, and coded references in correspondence reflect deliberate ritualized concealment rather than oversight. Contrastingly, historians and legal scholars emphasize the likelihood of human manipulation for purposes far more mundane, but no less morally complex. Hidden burials, it is argued, may represent efforts to obscure scandal, mismanagement, or improper death records. Parish records from the early 1900s reveal lapses in administrative oversight, conflicting dates of interment, and letters suggesting anxiety among clergy regarding accountability. Skeptics propose that the chamber's concealment arose from fear of public censure, litigation, or loss of authority, rather than esoteric ritual. The secrecy, they contend, was maintained through a combination of deliberate obfuscation, intimidation of witnesses, and careful reinterpretation of oral and written narratives. This perspective frames the events as a study in institutional vulnerability. The same structures meant to ensure moral oversight and social stability became tools for hiding mistakes, evoking fear and creating enduring mystery. Psychologists contribute a further layer of interpretation, focusing on perception, memory, and social anxiety. Collective trauma, reinforced by hierarchical structures and moral authority, may have shaped the way parishioners and townspeople perceived, recounted, and transmitted the events. Unexplained noises, apparitions, and dreams, frequently cited in oral histories, could be manifestations of psychosomatic responses to fear, guilt, or stress. Cognitive frameworks developed around moral expectations, religious instruction, and community monitoring might have magnified otherwise mundane occurrences, embedding them into narratives that convey spiritual significance or moral warning. These interpretations suggest that human cognition, social structure, and emotion are inseparable from historical narrative, shaping both memory and legend. Folklorists emphasize the moral and symbolic dimensions of the story, suggesting that the Church's hidden chambers evolved in public imagination into a cautionary tale. Stories of secret burials, mysterious artifacts, and unexplained phenomena serve as moral instruction, illustrating consequences for hubris, negligence, or sin. The legend of St. Bartholomew's became a vehicle for transmitting social norms and ethical reflection, blending fact and imagination to reinforce communal identity. In this framing, inconsistencies in records, oral embellishments, and recurring motifs, shadows, whispers, and dreams are not failures of memory but functional elements of folklore, consciously or unconsciously adapted to the community's needs. The Church becomes both a literal and figurative repository of spiritual authority, collective anxiety, and moral didacticism. Interdisciplinary analysis reveals how these frameworks, ritualistic, administrative, psychological, and folkloric, intersect and diverge. Archival letters and parish documents show deliberate ambiguity, instructions to conceal certain records, coded references to the chambers, and repeated reassurances to subordinate clergy regarding secrecy. Forensic reports from later investigations confirm the presence of human remains and artifacts inconsistent with recorded burials, suggesting intentional concealment, but leaving motive open to interpretation. Psychological frameworks explain why witnesses' perceptions and memories may differ. while folklore accounts illustrate how narratives evolve to fulfill social and moral functions. Each lens contributes insight but also amplifies ambiguity, reinforcing the unresolved nature of the mystery. The symbolic interpretation of the chambers offers another perspective. Some researchers argue that concealment functioned as a performative act, a tangible manifestation of moral, spiritual, or familial authority. Burials, hidden texts, and artifacts may have been intended to communicate control, obedience, or penitence across time, with secrecy enhancing the moral or spiritual weight of the act. This interpretation underscores the tension between the visible and the hidden, authority and subversion, and morality and mystery. The spaces beneath the altar become a metaphor for what is observed versus what is concealed, known versus unknowable, a motif repeated in folklore, memoir, and legend. Law and ethics intersect with these interpretations. Scholars debate whether contemporary clergy violated moral or legal codes, or whether later concealment represents ongoing ethical transgression. Letters hint at concern over accountability, fear of scandal, and negotiation of institutional responsibility. In some cases, concealment may have been justified as protecting vulnerable populations or preserving social order. In others, it may reflect self-interest or moral failure. These ambiguities illustrate the difficulty of applying modern ethical or legal judgment retrospectively, highlighting the complexity of human behavior in constrained social hierarchies. The narratives surrounding the church continue to evolve. Oral histories, memoirs, and scholarly analysis intersect, creating layered interpretations that blend historical reality, psychological perception, and moral instruction. Some descendants emphasize the spiritual dimension, recounting dreams, sensations, or premonitions tied to the church. Others focus on the procedural or administrative inconsistencies, framing the chambers as sites of bureaucratic mismanagement. Folklore adapts these elements into a cohesive narrative, emphasizing moral and psychological lessons while leaving factual certainty elusive. The interplay of memory, interpretation, and legend ensures that the church's mysteries remain culturally and psychologically resonant. Ultimately, the hidden chambers beneath St. Bartholomew's Church resist singular explanation. Was the concealment a deliberate act of ritual, a pragmatic cover-up, a manifestation of psychological trauma, or a combination of these factors? Evidence supports multiple, often conflicting interpretations, illustrating how human action, belief, and narrative construction converge. Viewers and scholars alike are left in tension, confronting the limits of certainty, the ambiguity of human motivation, and the interplay of fact, interpretation, and myth. The Church's legacy endures precisely because it cannot be fully explained, compelling reflection on morality, memory, and the human need to impose meaning upon the unknown. In the final analysis, St. Bartholomew's Church embodies the interplay of observation, interpretation, and imagination. Its hidden chambers, secret burials, and enigmatic artifacts challenge observers to discern intention from accident, ritual from deception, and history from legend. Theories of intent, ritualistic, administrative, psychological, or symbolic, intersect and overlap, leaving no definitive answer. It is in this unresolved ambiguity that the story's power persists, a haunting case study of faith, authority, memory, and the human drive to make sense of what lies beneath the surface. The Church stands as a locus of enduring mystery where interpretation, speculation, and moral reflection converge. Scholars, folklorists, and psychologists continue to debate, each adding nuance yet deepening the uncertainty. As descendants, townspeople, and curious observers encounter the site or its stories, they are drawn into a dialogue with history, memory, and imagination. Perhaps the hidden chambers were acts of devotion. Perhaps they were concealments born of fear or error. Perhaps their significance lies in the human capacity to imbue space with moral and spiritual meaning. The answer remains elusive, ensuring that St. Bartholomew's Church endures as a symbol of the complex interplay between human behavior, belief, and the unknown. The story concludes without resolution, leaving viewers to wrestle with unanswered questions. Every discovery, interpretation, and legend surrounding the Church reinforces contrasts: truth versus myth, morality versus secrecy, observation versus imagination. Theories of intent, ritual, cover-up, accident, or psychological projection coexist, unresolved, reflecting the multidimensional nature of human experience and narrative. In this tension, the Church persists as a site of fascination, a canvas for inquiry, and a reminder that some mysteries resist closure, existing perpetually at the intersection of fact, belief, and interpretation. The hidden chambers beneath St. Bartholomew's Church continue to cast a long shadow over the town and its inhabitants, a symbol of uncertainty that transcends generations. Even more than a century after their discovery, these spaces evoke questions that resist definitive answers. Were the burials and artifacts intentional acts of ritual, a practical effort to conceal scandal, or a combination of human error and moral panic? The story's persistence lies not in the clarity of events, but in the ambiguity that surrounds them. Descendants, historians, folklorists, and locals alike grapple with fragments of evidence, conflicting accounts, and oral histories that refuse to cohere into a single narrative. Each interpretation adds layers of meaning, yet deepens the tension between fact and imagination, authority and suspicion, reason and superstition. The clergy's actions remain particularly enigmatic. Reverend Malcolm Hargrove and his contemporaries were figures of authority, tasked with guiding the moral and spiritual life of their parishioners. Yet letters, memoirs, and internal correspondence hint at secrecy, fear, and deliberate obfuscation. Did they act to protect their congregation, or to shield themselves from accountability? Were the hidden chambers an attempt to communicate with the divine, to enforce moral lessons, or simply a means of hiding inconvenient truths? Scholars debate whether human intention or spiritual symbolism predominates, yet no consensus emerges, leaving observers suspended between rational explanation and the uncanny. Beyond human agency, memory and perception play critical roles in the story's endurance. Oral histories recount whispers beneath the altar, fleeting apparitions and dreams that mirror the church's hidden spaces. These recollections, passed down through families and communities, blend fact and imagination, creating a narrative where reality is as much psychological as physical. The town's social cohesion, reinforced by moral instruction and religious authority, amplified the impact of these events, ensuring that the legend would persist even as the church aged and its parishioners dispersed. Memory itself becomes both evidence and distortion, illustrating how collective trauma, imagination, and moral reflection intertwine to preserve mystery. The story also serves as a reflection on human attempts to reconcile authority, morality, and the inexplicable. Contrasts dominate: faith versus doubt, observation versus imagination, innocence versus corruption. Hidden vaults and cryptic documents act as metaphors for the limitations of understanding, the opacity of intention, and the fragility of moral certainty. As investigators, folklorists, and psychologists parse every detail, they confront the uncomfortable reality that some events resist categorization. The human need for explanation collides with the unknowable. In leaving questions unresolved, the narrative of St. Bartholomew's Church achieves a haunting universality. It is less a record of what definitively occurred than a meditation on how humans interpret, transmit, and mythologize events that defy easy understanding. The hidden chambers are simultaneously historical fact, psychological symbol, and cultural legend, persisting as a locus of intrigue and moral reflection. Perhaps the true significance lies not beneath the altar itself, but in the human imagination that continues to explore, speculate, and wrestle with the enduring enigma. The story remains open-ended, compelling viewers to confront uncertainty, morality, and the boundaries of comprehension, a legacy that haunts both history and consciousness alike.